Hey gardeners, Amy here with Garden Up. So I want to cover how to weed all different types of weeds with all the tools in one video. Here we go. So the most important thing when you're weeding is to understand what the weed is and how it spreads. Weeds will usually spread by one of two ways, either by seeding profusely in some cases, or by some kind of creeping root. And you need to know what it is in order to get it under control. So for instance, I have some grass, which is the type of grass that spreads by underground rhizome. So I have to get that grass root if I want to get the grass gone. I also have some herb Robert, I have a few dandelions still hiding in here, and I have some black medic and other clovers. I see a skeleton weed over in the corner there. There's just a few different types of things, and I need to know what each one is and how it spreads in order to get it under control. Okay, let's get started. So there's a few different tools I like to use to weed. If there's no irrigation and I'm trying to get creeping roots, I love using my garden fork because this just gets right under the dirt and helps me get up the roots. It helps me sift the soil and find all of those roots so that I can get them out. We dug up this bed in the middle of April, and then we weeded once more in May, and then it is now second half of June, and I'm weeding one more time. And this should, if I do it right, should get us ahead of the weeds forever. There will always be weeds, don't get me wrong on that one. I'm not saying I live in some fantasy where I never have to weed. But if you stay on top of them, they're not as big of a problem. Another important part of weeding is knowing when to use your gloves. If the plant has a lot of spines or prickly thorns or it's irritating, some plants will sting, like stinging nettles. Some plants have oils that'll make you sick, like poison ivy and poison oak. Know when to wear your gloves. This is Datura, and it has a sap that will irritate your skin. So here I am wearing gloves. So what I'm doing is just straight lines back and forth. I've already done over here. Another tool that I use if I'm trying to get a deep taproot is I might use a big shovel, or I might use a trowel, or I might use a hori-hori. I can't find my hori-hori, or I'd be using it, so I'm using a trowel instead. But that's for deep taproots. You can also use the garden fork for deep taproots, but it's not as effective because it tends to go around a taproot instead of picking it up. The other thing I do for seedlings is I use my shuffle hoe. So when I'm done sifting through everything with my fork and my shovel, I'll use the shuffle hoe to go back over it, and this does several things. One, it decapitates any little tiny seedlings that are coming up, and two, it smooths the soil. And then when I'm done with that, I will take my rake, either an expandable rake or a lawn rake, whichever, and I'll smooth everything over this way. And that gives the garden a nice finished look, and it also picks up a lot of little bits of weeds that I didn't want to pick up with my fingers. So that's the gist. I'm going to just keep weeding, and I'm going to talk about whatever I'm digging up as I find it. Lily found raspberries, and she's sharing them with me. Thank you. Yum, yum, yum. One thing to always bear in mind is keep your bucket right next to you. Do not put other tools in your bucket, or you'll likely throw them in your green bin or your compost. But you don't want to waste time walking back and forth with one or two weeds in your hand to wherever your bucket is. Just keep your bucket beside you at all times. Another tool that's really great for weeding is a claw. If you don't have a garden fork or something, you can use this in a lot of different ways that I'll get into. So over here, it's a little bit close to my other plants for me to be using my fork. So I'm just going to use my claw to get the weeds out. It's also another really good way to sift through soil and get roots and other junk out. Okay, here I have a common mallow, which is a deep taproot. I could either pop it up with my garden fork, or if it was too big for the fork, I could use a shovel, I could use my trowel, I could use whatever I want, tool, but I've got to get that taproot, otherwise it's just going to come right back. This was a dandelion that was popped off but this part of the root was left behind, and it's growing back. All right, so as I continue this way, I have a tree volunteer, easily picked up by the garden fork, a little bit of grass, fibrous root system. This one doesn't spread by rhizome, but I still want to get it out of here just because I don't want it. Then I have a grass right here. This one is the one with the rhizomes that creep underground, and I have to get the whole root. I've got to get all of these pieces right here. This is the goal. Now, coming up next, this little seedling right here is Virginia creeper, and the one next to it is a dandelion. But I'm getting really close to my huckleberry there, and I don't really want to disturb the soil really next to that. So I'm going to either be really careful with my fork, or I'm just going to use a different tool. In this case, I think I'm going to use a trowel. Right down in there, get as much of that root as you can. There, I got the whole thing. It looks like this was actually broken off before, and this is just a tiny piece that was left behind. But that's everything that was on that plant. Right there, that's what I'm looking for. These little white grass roots. That was a dandelion that was about to come up. Looks like I popped the head off at one point. Let's see if there's any more of it in here. Not that I can see. There's probably more. I'm not seeing it yet. That's another one. That was a dandelion. So there's a root. Oh, there it is. No, wait. That might be this. Might be the daylily. That's dandelion. This is grass. It's kind of fun to identify stuff as you pull it up. One, it's good practice. But two, it gives you a better idea of what you're searching for. I'll talk a little bit about watering before and after you weed. It's a good idea to have your soil be moist, but not sopping wet. Because if it's sopping wet, then you're working in mud. It tends to clump, and that's not good for the soil's structure. And it's just really difficult to get roots out. But if it's overly dry, most soils would turn into like a concrete that you can't dig through anyway. So this is perfect. I watered it, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday in this spot, and it's just perfect. The soil is crumbly, it's falling apart easily, but it's not gonna lose its structure by me doing this. Then after I finish all of this, I'm gonna water this area again, because I wanna make sure my huckleberries are watered for one thing. They need a lot of water, especially in the beginning. That one over there, I think, has already died. Unfortunately, it's all red and crispy. After weeding like this, it's a good idea to give the plants a drink so that the stuff you didn't pull up doesn't go into shock or anything. On the topic of watering your soil to soften it up, I want to demonstrate what happens when you don't water. So this is the xeric side of my house. It's very hard for me to get a hose over on this side, so everything growing here is drought tolerant. And, you know, I almost never look at it, so I don't weed it very often. But the soil, it's hard as rocks. It cracks. Instead of just loosening the roots, I have to break them out. And I've had soil that was even in worse shape than this. Same rules apply. Start with your tap roots and then shuffle over the rest. This corner here got a little too wet. Now it's very soppy. Virginia creeper, I want that out. It's a beautiful vine, but I don't want it here. Okay, so I can't get my big tools under here, but I can get my little claw. This one here is skeleton weed, which has sharp, pokey spines up the side, so I can't just really grab it barehanded and pull, but it also has a really deep taproot. I may not get the whole thing with the trowel, so I think I'm just gonna go straight to the shovel. Go a little ways away, shovel straight down in. Got most of it. Some of it still popped up, so that might be back later. This is a dandelion that somebody popped before, but didn't get the whole root, and so it's starting to come back. See the little babies coming up the top. But this time I got the whole root, so it's not going to be back. Now the shovel is not the best tool for grass, because if I put this down next to this grass with rhizomes, I'm going to cut more roots than I'm going to pull up. So I don't want to use this there. However, there is another dandelion right here that looks like it's been cut before. You see how it's got multiple bits coming up. So I'm going to use my shovel to try to get that whole root. Got it. Still didn't get it all. That's a fresh cut on the bottom, so I broke off the bottom there. But I got a whole bunch of tops out. So I'm going to keep digging and see if I can find that bottom. It's going down that far. It might come back still. It might starve before it gets to the surface. Little tiny dandelion top, but look at that root. That is crazy. Now, I do want to say dandelions are really not bad plants. They're not the weeds that we make them out to be. They do wonderful things for the soil. They're great for the bees. But they do tend to get out of hand, and they're past their prime as far as blooming, so I am going to take them out. This part over here is still just a little bit too wet because the sprinkler I had this morning was hitting this corner, so the soil's not breaking up in the same way that it did on the other side. A little bit more about how to use a claw for weeding. What I do is I put it right next to the weed, push it down with my hand, twist, and that sifts through the soil and pulls up the roots, so it'll get the whole weed. It's also excellent for edging, like if you want an edge, if you have an edge that you want refreshed, push it in right next to the edge and just twist away. It'll pull all the roots out, and it'll expose any roots that are about to grow in that direction. So they're easy to pull out and just stop the encroachment before it happens. This is a bit tedious if you have a whole lot of edge, but if you've just got a couple tree rings, or maybe like this where it's just the edge of a bed that you just want to freshen up real quick, it's a great little trick. The worst thing you could do is put a plant in a hole that's full of weed roots, because the weeds will just grow right through the plant, and then the whole thing is a loss. So once you've got your bed well weeded, then you can plant with confidence. Thanks for watching that video. If you liked it, please let me know by hitting the like button. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, or if you have an idea for a video you'd like to see. I'll see if I can put it together for you. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future content. Have an awesome day. Stay cool out there, guys. It's getting hot. I'll see you in the garden.